The twin suns of Viridian Mesa bled across the horizon, painting the rust-colored desert in shades of fire and bruised purple. It was a world at the edge of nowhere, a final resting place for ships and secrets, and exactly the kind of place Rusty Vance felt most at home. He moved through the skeletal remains of a fallen freighter, a titan of commerce now picked clean by scavengers and time. The wind, thin and sharp, carried the taste of iron dust and a million years of silence. It was a lonely sound, but it was a familiar one. In his ear, a scratchy, mournful sound fought against the wind's whisper, the raw, electric howl of a slide guitar, a ghost from a dead world and a forgotten time, earth blues, music for broken hearts and empty highways, a perfect soundtrack for the graveyard of a galaxy. "Are you quite finished playing in the sandbox, Rusty?" A voice crackled through his comms, sharp and devoid of patience. It was Betsy, his ship, his only constant companion. Her synthesized voice was programmed for efficiency, but decades of their association had curdled it into a fine, grating sarcasm. "My external sensors are picking up enough particulate matter to build a new, significantly less impressive moon. I'd rather you not track it all over my clean floors." Rusty grunted, his massive frame easily maneuvering a twisted sheet of reinforced alloy. His muscles, honed by a life of hard labor and harder fights, strained against the worn leather of his vest. "Almost done, old girl. Found a C-grade energy converter. The coils look intact." "Fascinating," Betsy deadpanned. "My very own knight in shining armor, rescuing damsels in distress from the scrap heap. Do try not to contract tetanus. It would be an undignified end." He allowed a faint smile to touch his lips. Her nagging was as much a part of his routine as the morning coffee, and the deep ache of solitude that never truly left him. He was here for her, after all. The old freighter, the Betsy, was a patchwork of repairs and stubborn willpower. She needed parts constantly, and black market prices were for fools and desperate men. Rusty was no fool, and his desperation was a quiet, controlled burn, not a wildfire. He secured the converter to his back harness and turned to survey the landscape. The desolate beauty of Viridian Mesa was breathtaking. Crimson dunes stretched to meet jagged rock spires that clawed at the violet sky. It was a harsh, unforgiving place. A place where a man could disappear. A place where a past like his could, for a time, lose his scent on the solar winds. The blues song in his ear shifted, a gravelly voice singing about a promise made and a long road home. Rusty's jaw tightened. He knew all about broken promises. He was running from one that had shadowed him across half the galaxy. That's when he felt it. Not a sound, but a change in the silence. The wind had died abruptly. The desert's ambient hum had vanished. It was the kind of unnatural stillness that precedes an attack. His hand went to the heavy-caliber pistol holstered at his hip, his movements fluid and economical. Years of living on the fringe had honed his instincts into a razor's edge. He dropped low behind the husk of a derelict engine block, his eyes scanning the ridgeline. Shadows detached themselves from the deeper pools of darkness between the rocks. They weren't the clumsy silhouettes of common raiders. They moved with a predatory grace, their forms lean and disciplined, clad in armor that blended perfectly with the ochre rock. There were at least 6 of them, fanning out, a net of silent professionals closing in. "Rusty, I'm detecting multiple life signs approaching your position." Non-communicative, Betsy's voice was suddenly clipped, the sarcasm gone, replaced by cold analysis. "Their energy signatures are military grade. I suggest an immediate and rapid withdrawal." "A little late for that," he muttered, thumbing the safety off his weapon. The first shot was not his. A bolt of focused energy slammed into the metal beside his head, showering him with molten sparks. He fired back, 2 precise shots that sent one of the figures tumbling from the rocks. He didn't wait for confirmation. He was already moving, sprinting for better cover, the heavy converter on his back a cumbersome weight. He was fast and brutally effective. A lifetime of brawls in lawless spaceports and firefights in zero-G had made him a formidable opponent. He broke one attacker's arm with a vicious block before putting a bullet in the chest of another. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered bear, a whirlwind of muscle and instinct. But they were better. They were a team. They didn't try to kill him. They herded him, using suppressive fire and coordinated movements to box him in. A blast caught his leg, not a killing shot, but a searing, crippling blow that sent him crashing into the red sand. He roared in frustration and pain, trying to raise his pistol, but 2 of them were on him in an instant. They disarmed him with an efficiency that spoke of endless training. He struggled, his sheer strength making it a difficult task, but a sharp, paralyzing shock from a stun baton to the base of his neck finally sent his world spiraling into a starless black. His last conscious thought was of the blues song still faintly playing in his ear, a lonely lament for a man out of time and out of luck. Consciousness returned in jarring waves, bringing with it a throbbing headache and the metallic taste of his own blood. He was on his knees, his hands bound tightly behind his back. The air was cooler here, sheltered from the open desert. He was in a vast cavern, or perhaps a deep-cut canyon, the walls lit by the soft rhythmic glow of strange crystalline lamps. The place hummed with quiet activity. Dozens of the silent warriors moved about, their discipline evident in every gesture. This was no mere bandit camp, it was a military base. 2 guards hauled him to his feet and forced him forward, toward a raised dais at the center of the cavern. He walked with a defiant limp, his gaze sweeping the area, cataloging every detail, every potential weapon, every escape route. His mind, even in pain, was a cold machine of tactical assessment. On the dais stood a single figure. As he drew closer, the details sharpened and the breath caught in his throat. It was a woman. She was tall, impossibly so, with an athletic build that was all lean muscle and poised strength. Her skin was the color of a twilight sky, a soft blue-gray adorned with intricate swirling silver markings that traced the high arches of her cheekbones and the line of her sharp jaw. Pointed ears, elegant and severe, rose from a cascade of hair as white as spun starlight. She wore the same practical armor as her soldiers, but hers was embellished with emblems of command. She held no weapon, yet she radiated an authority more potent than any blaster rifle. Her eyes, the color of a deep space nebula, were fixed on him. This was their leader, Shivara. Her soldiers shoved him to his knees before her. He met her gaze without flinching, a lifetime of defiance hardening his own features. He had faced down corporate executioners, alien monstrosities, and the cold void itself. He would not be cowed by this desert warlord. He expected a threat, an interrogation, the cold pronouncement of a death sentence. He was prepared for it. What he was not prepared for was her reaction. She took a slow step forward, her movements a study in contained power. Her head tilted, and her incredible eyes widened, not with malice or anger, but with a pure, unadulterated shock that bordered on awe. A quiet murmur rippled through the assembled warriors as they watched their leader's composure crack for the first time any of them had likely ever seen. She circled him slowly, her analytical gaze taking in every detail, the rugged, square line of his jaw, the unfamiliar texture of his dark, sweat-matted hair, the sheer bulk and alien anatomy of his Terran musculature. Finally, she stopped in front of him and spoke. Her voice was a low, melodic contralto, yet it carried effortlessly through the vast space. It was laced not with menace, but with utter disbelief. "By the first stars," she breathed, the words more to herself than to him. The old tales, the myths of the core worlds, they're true. She knelt, bringing herself level with him. Her strange, beautiful face was inches from his, her expression one of a scholar who had just discovered a living, breathing fossil. "Look at him," she commanded her soldiers, though her eyes never left his. "He is exactly as the archives described." She reached out a hesitant hand, her long, graceful fingers stopping just short of his face. "A man from Earth," she whispered, the name of his long-lost planet sounding like a sacred, forgotten word on her tongue. "I never believed I would see one in my lifetime." The days that followed blurred into a strange, disorienting rhythm. Rusty's captivity was unlike any he had ever experienced or heard of in the grim tales swapped in deep space cantinas. He wasn't thrown in a dark cell or put to hard labor. He was an object of intense, clinical study. His accommodations were a spacious alcove carved into the canyon wall, sealed not by bars but by a shimmering energy field. It was furnished with simple but comfortable items, and the food they brought him was strange but nourishing. He was a specimen in a zoo, a living relic on display. He spent his time observing his observers. Shivara's people, the Keelar as he came to learn they were called, were a study in disciplined grace. They were warriors, every one of them, but they moved with the quiet purpose of monks. They watched him from a distance, their nebula-colored eyes filled with a mixture of suspicion and a deep, abiding curiosity that mirrored their leaders. He was the monster from the storybooks, the mythical Terran-made flesh. And then there were the interrogations. Every cycle, Shivara would come to his enclosure. The energy field would hiss and dissolve, and she would enter alone, unarmed. It was a calculated display of confidence that did not go unnoticed by Rusty. She was not afraid of him. She would sit on a simple stone bench opposite him, her posture ramrod straight, her presence filling the space. But she didn't ask about his ship, his cargo, or his contacts. Her questions were far more dangerous. "Your world, Earth," she said one evening, the crystal lamps casting soft blue light on her silver facial markings. "The archives say it was lost in the Great Collapse, that your people scattered to the stars like seeds on a dead wind. Is this true?" Rusty leaned back against the cool stone wall, crossing his powerful arms over his chest. He met her gaze, a wry, cynical smile playing on his lips. It was a mask he had perfected over decades. "History is written by the winners, ma'am. Let's just say we had a bad century." "A bad century that erased a founding world from the star charts?" she pressed, her intelligence sharp and unyielding. "What kind of species are you to be so careless with your own home?" "The humankind," he answered, his voice a low gravel. "We love hard, fight harder, and break everything we touch, especially the things we love." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than he intended. He saw a flicker of something in her eyes. Not pity, but understanding. A shared weariness. He learned her story in pieces, extracted through his own careful prodding. Her people were native to Viridian Mesa. For generations they had lived in harmony with the harsh planet, their lives governed by ancient codes of honor and a deep spiritual connection to the land. Then the hegemony Korvax had arrived, a soulless corporate entity that saw the planet not as a home, but as a resource to be plundered. They strip-mined the sacred mesas for rare minerals, poisoned the water, and enslaved any Kielar who resisted. Shivara was the daughter of the last chieftain, a leader born of tragedy, raised in rebellion. Her fight was not for profit or glory. It was for the soul of her world. Rusty listened, his cynical exterior a fortress around the core of the man he used to be. He'd seen this story 100 times on 100 different worlds, the strong devouring the weak. It was the galaxy's oldest song, but hearing it from her, seeing the cold fire in her eyes, stirred a dormant part of him. He saw an honor in her that reminded him of the code he once lived by, before the promised quebrada, the broken promise, had sent him into his self-imposed exile. The turning point came during a quiet, tense evening. The ever-present blues music was leaking from his comm implant, a low, mournful tune about a man who'd lost his way. Shivara's head was tilted, her pointed ears twitching slightly. "That sound," she said, her voice soft. "It is always with you." "A transmission?" "Music," Rusty said. He saw her blank look. "Coordinated sound. To tell a story. To make you feel something." "Feel what?" she asked, her curiosity genuine, almost childlike. "My people have battle hymns and morning chants. They serve a purpose. This just sounds like pain." He couldn't help but chuckle. A short, harsh sound. "That's the blues, sweetheart. It's what you get when you have nothing left to lose but the shirt on your back and the ache in your heart. It's the music of survivors." On an impulse he couldn't explain, he fiddled with his comm unit, amplifying the sound so it filled the small chamber. He chose a different song, a slow, powerful ballad by a long-dead legend. A song about finding a moment of grace in a world of trouble. He watched her as the music washed over the room. She closed her eyes. Her stern warrior's face softened. Her shoulders, usually so tense with the weight of command, relaxed by a fraction. The silver markings on her skin seemed to shimmer in the low light. She wasn't just hearing the music. She was feeling it. A concept, he realized, that might be as alien to her as his own biology. When the last note faded into silence, she opened her eyes. They were luminous, holding a new, unguarded emotion. "The pain," she said, her voice a near whisper. "It is beautiful." In that moment, the dynamic shifted. The walls of curiosity had been breached. He was no longer just a specimen, and she was no longer just his captor. They were two lonely souls, a man who had lost his home, and a woman fighting to save hers, finding a common language in the sorrowful notes of a forgotten world. The following night she came again, but this time she gestured for him to follow her. The guards tensed, but a sharp look from Shivara froze them in place. She led him out of the main cavern, down a narrow, winding passage he'd never seen, his bare feet silent on the cold stone. They emerged onto a high, secluded ledge overlooking the vast canyon. The twin moons were rising, casting long, ghostly shadows across the desert floor. In the distance, a colossal scar of light and fire marred the landscape, the 24-hour operation of a Korvax mining crawler, a metal beast slowly devouring her planet. "This is what we are fighting," she said, her voice tight with a controlled rage. "They do not see the beauty. They see only ore. They are a disease." Then she turned from the grim vista and faced him. "You shared a piece of your soul with me," she said, referring to the music. "It is our way to answer a gift with a gift, an offering of trust." She knelt on the ledge, not in supplication, but in reverence. She took a handful of the fine, red sand and held it in her open palm. Closing her eyes, she began to hum, a low, resonant frequency that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The sand in her hand began to glow, first a faint ember, then a brilliant crimson. The light pulsed in time with her humming, a second heartbeat in the palm of her hand. Rusty watched, mesmerized. It was not technology. It was something deeper, something innate, a connection between her and her world that he could feel in his bones. It was a display of profound vulnerability, an act of absolute trust. She was showing him the very lifeblood of her people, the magic the Korvax were so callously extinguishing. She opened her eyes and looked at him, her face illuminated by the glowing sand. The professional distance was gone. In its place was an unspoken question, a dangerous and magnetic pull that transcended species, language, and the impossible gulf of stars between their origins. His cynical armor, so carefully maintained for so long, felt brittle, threatening to shatter into 1,000 pieces under the intensity of her gaze. He was a prisoner, and she was a queen at war. Nothing could ever come of this. But as he stood there, bathed in the sacred light of her world, Rusty Vance knew he was in more danger now than he had been the moment her soldiers captured him. The fragile piece of their shared moment on the ledge was shattered by a sound that belonged nowhere near this sacred quiet. It started as a low drone, a discordant insect buzz on the edge of hearing, then rapidly grew into a guttural, tearing roar that echoed off the canyon walls. Red and gold warning strobes flashed to life across the hidden base, casting a hellish, pulsating light on Shiovara's face. Her expression hardened instantly, the brief softness replaced by the cold obsidian of a commander at war. "Scouts," she hissed, letting the glowing sand fall from her hand, its light extinguishing as it hit the stone. "They found us." Below them, the entire camp erupted into controlled chaos. The Kylar warriors moved with lethal purpose, grabbing weapons from hidden caches, forming defensive perimeters at the canyon entrances. There was no panic, only the grim efficiency of a people who had been fighting for their lives for generations. "Get him back to his cell," Shiovara commanded the 2 guards who had appeared at the tunnel entrance, their weapons drawn. They grabbed Rusty's arms, but his eyes were locked on hers. He saw the weight of 100 lives settle onto her shoulders. He saw the cold calculus of sacrifice in her nebula eyes. She was preparing to die for her people, right here, right now. "Rusty, I'm reading multiple inbound signatures." Betsy's voice, tinny and urgent, cut through his comm. "Hegemony Korvax assault craft, heavy armor. They're deploying ground troops at the canyon mouth. The odds are unfavorable." Unfavorable. That was Betsy's coded language for a slaughter. The guards were dragging him back down the tunnel, back toward his cage. The sounds of battle began to reach them. The percussive thump of heavy plasma cannons, the sharp crackle of rifle fire, the alien war cries of the Kylar mixed with the synthesized barking orders of Korvax soldiery. They shoved him back into his alcove. One of the guards reactivated the shimmering energy field just as a tremendous explosion rocked the entire cavern complex. Dust and rock rained down from the ceiling. The guard fumbled with the control panel, his eyes wide with fear, before turning to join the fray. Rusty was alone, trapped, a spectator to a massacre. He slammed his fist against the energy field. It sizzled and threw him back, the impact jarring his teeth. He was a prisoner again, helpless. He could hear the battle raging, coming closer. He could hear the disciplined volleys of the Kylar being overwhelmed by the sheer, brutal firepower of the Korvax forces. He heard a Keeler scream, a sound of agony cut brutally short, and something inside him broke. It was the memory, hot and sharp, of the Promesa Quebrada. Another firefight, another world, another face, contorted in fear, looking to him for a salvation he failed to provide. He had run then. He had spent a decade running from that ghost, letting the guilt corrode his soul, hiding behind a wall of cynicism and the lonely howl of his blues music. He had promised himself he would never be in that position again. He would never again stand by and watch honor die while he saved his own skin. With a roar that came from the deepest part of his being, he threw his entire 240-pound frame against the energy field's projector unit on the wall. The first impact barely dented the metal housing. The second cracked it. The third, fueled by a tidal wave of fury and self-loathing, shattered it completely. Sparks flew. The shimmering wall flickered, sputtered, and died. He was free. His path was clear. A side tunnel. A ventilation shaft he'd mentally mapped during his first day. It would lead him out to the upper desert, away from the main fighting. He could make it to the wreckage field, find a comm relay, and call Betsy. He could be gone in an hour. Another ghost disappearing into the void, leaving another world to burn behind him. It was the smart play, the survivor's play. But then, through the smoke and chaos, he saw her. Shivara was in the heart of the maelstrom. She moved like a storm herself, a silver-haired whirlwind of death. In her hands, she wielded a traditional Kylar power glaive, its edge humming with lethal energy. She parried a plasma bolt with the weapon's shaft, spun, and disemboweled a heavily armored Korvax soldier in a single, fluid motion. Her face was a mask of focused rage, her blue-gray skin streaked with grime and the black ichor of a wounded comrade. She was a warrior queen, magnificent and terrible, leading from the front, but she was being pushed back. Her honor guard was dwindling, cut down by overwhelming numbers. A heavy trooper was flanking her, leveling a repeating cannon that would tear her apart. Rusty saw it all in a split second. The escape route, her impending death, the ghost of his past. Damn it all, he growled. He didn't run for the tunnel. He ran for the fight. He scooped up a fallen Keelar's pulse rifle from the ground. The weapon felt alien in his hands, but its purpose was universal. He brought the stock to his shoulder, the instincts of 100 forgotten firefights taking over. He sighted the flanking trooper, exhaled, and squeezed the trigger. The bolt of energy hit the Korvax soldier square in the back, dropping him in a clatter of useless armor. Shivara spun around at the sound, her eyes widening in disbelief as she saw the Terran, her prisoner, fighting his way toward her. He moved not with her people's grace, but with a brutal, earth-born power. He used his sheer mass as a weapon, smashing one soldier with the butt of the rifle before shooting another at point-blank range. He was a bull in a china shop, a force of raw, kinetic violence that the disciplined Korvax soldiers were completely unprepared for. He reached her side, planting his feet and laying down a curtain of suppressive fire. "You're getting sloppy, Commander," he yelled over the din of battle. A look of shocked astonishment crossed her face before it was replaced by a fierce, feral grin. "I had it under control, Terran," she shouted back, though she immediately adjusted her position to cover his left flank. They fought back to back, a perfect, impossible fusion of two worlds. Her movements were precise, elegant, a dance of death with her glaive. His were direct, powerful, brutally efficient. She was the scalpel, he was the sledgehammer. Where she dodged, he charged. Where she sliced, he smashed. They didn't speak, but they communicated in the universal language of combat, anticipating each other's moves, covering each other's weaknesses. A two-person army against a corporate horde. They pushed the Korvax back, carving a space around them in the chaos. For a breathless moment, the enemy assault faltered, stunned by the ferocity of the alien queen and the mythical beast fighting at her side. The battle raged on, but the tide had turned. Inspired by their leader's impossible new ally, the remaining Keelar warriors rallied, fighting with renewed ferocity. They finally drove the last of the Korvax soldiers from the main cavern, sealing the entrance behind them with a controlled rock slide. Silence fell, thick and heavy, punctuated by the groans of the wounded and the hiss of smoldering machinery. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and blood. Rusty stood amidst the wreckage, his chest heaving, his body bruised and battered. The borrowed rifle felt heavy in his hands. Shivara approached him, her glaive deactivated. Her silver markings were stark against her flushed skin. She looked at him, and for the first time, he saw no commander, no curiosity, no queen. He saw only the woman, vulnerable and awestruck. The respect that had been growing between them had been forged in the crucible of battle into something stronger, something undeniable. The admiration had become a fierce, burning attraction. She reached up, her hand surprisingly gentle, and wiped a smear of grime from his cheek. Her touch sent a jolt through him, more powerful than any stun baton. The tension, the adrenaline, the unspoken thing that had been arcing between them for days finally snapped. He dropped the rifle with a clang. His hand came up to cup the back of her head, his fingers tangling in her starlight white hair. He pulled her to him, and she met him halfway. Their kiss was not gentle or tender. It was a desperate, primal collision of survivors, a raw and hungry affirmation of life in the very heart of death. It was the taste of ozone, blood, and the impossible hope of finding an anchor in the storm. It was a moment of peace, stolen from the jaws of war, and for that one moment, neither of them was alone. The aftermath of the battle was a somber affair. The Keelar mourned their dead with a quiet, dignified sorrow that felt heavier than any wail or cry. Rusty helped them, his great strength used not for violence, but for moving rubble and tending to the wounded. He worked in silence, a strange, hulking figure among the graceful, blue-skinned aliens. He was no longer a prisoner or a myth. He was a comrade, an ally who had bled with them. No one gave him orders, but no one had to. He saw what needed doing, and did it. The code of honor he thought he'd buried was still there, beating like a faint but steady drum in his chest. Later, when the dead had been consecrated and the watches set, Shivara found him on that same secluded ledge where she had shown him her people's magic. He was staring out at the crimson desert, at the distant, malevolent glow of the Korvax mining operation. The enemy had been repelled, but they were still out there, a festering wound on her world. She came and stood beside him, the silence between them comfortable, freighted with the unspoken truths of the day. "They will be back," she said, her voice low and weary. It wasn't a question. "They always come back," Rusty replied, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Bullies and thieves never learn. This base is compromised. We will have to abandon it within the cycle, find a new place to hide, a new place to fight." She sighed, a sound of infinite exhaustion. "The fight is all my people have ever known." He turned to look at her then. In the soft glow of the twin moons, the fatigue was etched on her face, but it couldn't dim the fire in her eyes. He had never seen anyone so beautiful, or so utterly chained to their destiny. And in that moment, the cold, hard reality of their situation settled over them both like a shroud. They were from different worlds in every conceivable way. His path was a lonely, endless line across the star charts, a flight from a past that could never be outrun. Her path was a circle, forever bound to this single piece of rock, to the survival of her people. To ask her to leave was to ask her to stop being herself. To offer to stay was a lie he couldn't bring himself to tell. The same ghosts that had compelled him to fight for her were the very ones that would force him to leave. Trouble followed him, and he would not lead it to her doorstep again. "You should go," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it cut him deeper than any blade. She was releasing him, a queen giving a final, painful command. "Your ship, your life is out there, in the stars." "There's not much of a life," he said, the admission raw and honest. "Just a lot of space between places I can't call home." "But it is your space," she countered gently. "You are a creature of the void, Rusty Vance. A wanderer. To cage you here would be a cruelty." She looked down at her own hands. "And my duty is to them. I am their hope. I cannot be anything else." The truth of it was a bitter pill. They were adults forged in hardship. They knew that duty and desire were often two separate, warring countries. He had found something here, in her, that felt like the home he'd been searching for, and she had found something in him, a glimpse of a galaxy beyond her endless war. But it was a paradise built on a fault line, destined to crumble. He reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out his old music player, a relic from a bygone era. He handed it to her. "Keep this," he said. "When the fight gets too loud, it helps." She took it, her long fingers tracing its worn metallic surface. "A piece of your soul," she murmured, remembering his words. She then unclasped a small woven amulet from around her own neck. It was made of dark leather and centered with a single smooth red stone from the heart of the mesa. "And this is a piece of mine. It is not a gift. It is a marker for a debt of honor. My life and the lives of my people are yours." He took the amulet. It was warm from her skin. The weight of it in his calloused palm felt immense. "Shivara," he started, his voice thick with 1,000 things he couldn't say. "I know," she whispered, stopping him. She raised herself on her toes and gave him one last kiss. This one was different. It wasn't born of fire and adrenaline. It was slow, tender, and filled with the profound sadness of goodbye. It was the taste of finality. "Go now," she said, stepping back, her commander's mask slipping back into place, though her eyes betrayed her. "Before the sun's rise, before I ask you to stay." He nodded, unable to speak. He gave her one last long look, memorizing the way the moonlight caught the silver in her markings, the strength in her jaw, the universe of sorrow and duty in her eyes. Then he turned and walked away, the red stone amulet clutched tightly in his fist. The journey back to the Betsy was a silent, lonely trek across the cooling desert. The wreckage field was just as he had left it, a tomb of forgotten giants under the indifferent stars. The moment his boots hit the loading ramp, her voice filled the ship's interior. "Well, look what the solar wind blew in," Betsy's synthesized voice announced, dripping with its usual sarcasm. "For a moment I thought I'd have to list myself as previously owned on the Galactic Network. Did you enjoy your little vacation?" Rusty walked past the console, heading straight for the cockpit and collapsing into the worn pilot's chair. He didn't answer. There was a pause. The hum of the ship's life support seemed to deepen. Betsy's vocal processors whirred, recalibrating. When she spoke again, the biting edge was gone, replaced by something softer, a frequency she rarely used. External sensors picked up traces of plasma scoring and biological residue on your gear, Rusty. It wasn't a vacation, was it? He said nothing. He leaned his head back against the headrest, closing his eyes. He could still feel the phantom warmth of Shivara's hand on his cheek. "Course laid in?" Betsy asked quietly. "Just out," he finally managed to say, his voice rough. "Pick a direction, any direction, and take it fast." "Understood." The engines of the old freighter whined to life, a familiar, comforting groan. The ship lifted from the planet's surface, a silent ascent into the star-dusted black. On the main view screen, the angry red marble of Viridian Mesa shrank with alarming speed, becoming just another point of light in an endless sea of them. Rusty opened his hand and looked at the amulet. The small red stone seemed to absorb the dim light of the cockpit, a tiny sleeping ember of a world he had to leave behind, a world with a warrior queen who was, at this very moment, preparing for her next battle. He reached for the console, his movements slow and deliberate, and switched on the audio system. A moment later, the cockpit filled with the sound of a lone guitar, playing a slow, heavy, aching blues riff. It was a song about leaving a part of yourself behind, about the long, lonely road ahead. It was the perfect soundtrack for another memory that would become another scar, another ghost to ride with him through the silent, unforgiving darkness. The Betsy jumped to hyperspace, leaving the world, the woman, and the brief, fiery whisper of what might have been far, far behind. The journey continued. He was still the last Outlander, and he was more alone than ever. A man's greatest battles are not fought for glory, but for the promises he makes to the ghosts of his past. The road is long and lonely, but it's better when we travel together. If this story touched you, subscribe and share it with a friend who appreciates the old code of honor.